All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order now that we've got through all our technical difficulties over here. I don't know that I have much to say, so I'm just going to kick it off to whoever wants to kick this conversation off. Matt or Chase or Gordon or all of the above.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hope you're well. A little warmer this afternoon, so it was a nice treat to get a little break from the cold. I think really what we wanted to have for an opportunity created for you tonight were if there was any additional reactions to the timeline you were shared or that was shared with you at the last meeting, and then also to talk about before Chase and I and the team really construct a kind of a backward map or a timeline, would be some of the considerations that you guys feel are important to include in that timeline, and probably thinking around ideas like preschool expansion or early childhood expansion, the middle school, junior high conversation, and then the learning pathways or CTE and how that incorporates together. So when I think about that, I think about what level of community engagement do you want to have around any of those topics, how considerable, how deep, surveys versus in-person meetings, just to get your reactions to that, and then also what the team needs to provide you so we can make informed decisions on that. So, research or opinions around those delivery models, really, when we talk grade level configuration and what that looks like. So I think those things would be helpful for us to know so that we can effectively construct a timeline that would account for those different parts that we want to put into the plan. So depending on for example, if you wanted a lot of community engagement around one of those topics, then we're going to need to create several of those sessions in the next couple months to do that. If you feel like some community input, but maybe not to a great extent around one of those topics, maybe helps accelerate one of those conversations and decisions a little quicker. So hopefully that makes some sense, but I think it's a chance for you to give some more feedback. I think the night we shared that timeline, there's a lot to take in, and so wanted to give you also a chance to react or respond to that anyway. We obviously have Dwayne and Jeff here to be able to answer questions about that or just the larger concept kind of map as we move forward here.
Can you project the timeline by any chance? Is that hard for you to put up? And then similarly, when we did the FMP, we had that bit, like you have that big piece of paper. This is so basic, but I still have it just sitting around. Just a
14-footer?
No, not that, this thing. It just helps visually for everybody here to have it a copy for themselves. I just looked at it all the time. And this timeline is one of those things that would be nice to look at. I know it will change as we actually get more specific.
Are you talking about this one?
Yeah,
Okay.
I am. It's helpful for some of us who are visual people. I really liked having that always around. I had it in my car for months, and now I have it in my office.
Well, he's loaded up. You should know too that I'm constantly looking at this, and I'm moving little pieces here and there.
Yep.
It's a work in progress. It always has been.
Okay, so don't give us anything printed yet.
Well,
Maybe.
you got it as an attachment last time.
Yep.
So I haven't given. I'm not going to share anything to do with you until we get a little further down the road.
Okay. All right.
Didn't get it. Oh.
Motion to pull up the board down.
Thanks, Kim. Sorry. Sure. No problem at all.
I've been looking at, while we're waiting, we put out a request for proposals from architects and engineers, and they're due, most of them are due next Tuesday, so that we can include them on your next board meeting. So we got some of that coming already for those projects that are at the top.
Yeah.
And then we have a couple other projects a little further down the line that they'll come in at the next meeting after that. So anyway, we've started that process. But in talking with those guys, you should know too that sometimes with the current inflation and state of the construction industry, we're going to have to make a few little modifications. We talked about that, JP, making accommodations for some of those changes. So you'll see some of that too soon. But that's my input, I guess.
So the comment I would add to between what Matt and Dwayne said, and Maka, thanks for having us put this up, is that what I shared with Matt this morning as we started to frame this conversation was everything that's on that page, Dwayne, the team, is not only excited about, but we could do without having any additional conversation. Those are the projects, remember, that we called like completing the promise, and things that we think have already been very lined out by what the community expects and that we can deliver on all of that. But what we need to have the conversation on the pieces that Matt talked about tonight is even if we did this work, it looked like we're showing great progress over the next 5 years. But we can't wait until all that work's done to then develop what are these other pieces going to be. Because in some ways, even though those projects are on there and developed in a very skeleton-like framework, some of this discussion can impact what we do, maybe how we do some of the configuration. Matt mentioned early childhood or preschools, and then that middle school versus junior high concept for one piece as an example. We might not need a new junior high or middle school for 5 to 7 years, but we can't wait then to purchase the property, right? And so we have to start having those conversations now because it's going to help us make some of those determinations as it looks at. Same with early childhood and some of those pieces. So we're well on our way on this and love the feedback, but that's why we can't lose sight of some of those other pieces, and that's kind of what that big purple box is, that discussion is around those concepts tonight, so that we can just start kind of putting the pieces in place that Matt talked about for community engagement on those areas.
So do we have pros and cons about the middle school conversation?
Well, I think that would be a significant element of what we'd want to bring to you and have in your array of thinking, right? So when I think about that conversation, you really have to think about it from a grade level configuration conversation, right? Because it's more than just probably a junior high, middle school. It's really going to impact your elementary schools. It's going to, the early childhood conversation's an easy one to tie with it and probably impossible to separate from it in some standpoint because of our enrollment and our space at our elementary building. So when I think about those things, I think there's probably a significant community input portion around, okay, what do they believe about grade level configuration? And then there's also a significant portion about what data and research tells us about the best approach to teach and learning in those configurations. And then trying to take all of those inputs and for the board to make an effective decision for the school district about how we advance through that.
My concern with community input is, well, I, for example, could provide input. It would be based on my personal experience, which is irrelevant, in my opinion. You know, I mean, a lot of people are going to bring to the table their mostly unpleasant junior high experiences, maybe. But I would rather, I mean, I'd like to focus on the educational aspects of it, not what people's opinions are on it.
I was going to rip that Band-Aid off tonight. I've talked to Matt about it in the past, but my personal opinion on it, I think we really need to evaluate the middle school format and go to it. A lot of the things that I've heard, and this is me, and this is why I think we need more feedback on, like the professionals, right? There's not any chances for junior high kids to really explore anything. We have very limited options at our junior high level for classes, right? That's a thing we hear quite a bit. CTE, when you get to high school, kids have already kind of figured out what they want to do, and maybe it's too late to get them there, right? And then you add on like the physical aspects of like the elementaries are just too crowded. So in my head, I see a middle school format where we're pulling kids out of the elementaries, making space to have potentially preschools in all of the local buildings, which I think would be a huge boon for us. You can then have more years in that middle school area where you can get kids chances to do more things and figure out what they want to do as they go through life earlier. And so I think it has real educational benefits. But this is all my head and my speculation of how it would play out. But I really think that that's something I would want. To Maka's point, like, what does research say about that kind of stuff? I kind of informally talked to some of our junior high administrators and kind of got their take on it. And pretty much to a T, they were all sort of on a balance, right? Good and bad on it. They had concerns about it, and then they liked other things about it. I think some of the concerns were just like the social behavior of sixth graders moving up, and then if you even think even younger, because some middle schools are 5'8", that might be a bit of a stretch, but I don't know. But mostly that just how the kids get along, and my counter argument to that is, but a sixth grader is very social with the kindergartner? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. But they were all kind of on board with talking about it, but nobody was like, yeah, that's great, or don't do it at all. They were sort of in the middle, and which I can understand. I think that's people are going to come with their own experiences. My personal experience was I was in 5th grade when they told us that 6th grade was now going to move to middle school because we did have junior highs. And so I never got to be the oldest kid in elementary. And it really sucked for me. But once I was there, the middle school, like that was just what it was. It was middle school. It was just another grade of class. So the kids handle it just fine. It is going to be parents not maybe taking some of those personal experiences and projecting on what it might be. So I think that's where you have to have the educational benefits, to put out there and say, but here's what we'll get out of it. And I think that's an important place for us to start.
I think you lead with the educational benefits and then you go to the efficiency or the building space, whatever words you want to use. Efficiency is not probably a real good one. But I think both of those will be important factors for the community.
What's the upside of junior high? Like, why is it a thing? Why do we have 7 and 8? What's the benefit of that?
I know our team is probably going to sum this up or maybe accelerate it a little bit. I think what you'll find from our team is presenting you a lot of reasons why middle schools will be the right way to look at this. One of the things just based on what Sean was talking about there that I think about is when we consider the social emotional impact of just what's happened the last 18 months and then look at our junior high model, that's a very short time frame for anybody to build effective relationships with kids. And about the time those relationships are developed, boom, you're off to a new attendance center and having to restart that whole process. And who does that impact most significantly, right? And who is that harder to do in a new setting? We know it's our structurally disadvantaged kids, right? So I think when we would make a more formal presentation to you with research data, best practice approaches, you're going to hear it a lot of pro middle school. I do think there's a lot of limitations to the junior high model from even a curricular aspect like Sean talked about. The amount of offerings and limitations we have to provide exploratory opportunities are pretty limited to kids. So a lot of anecdotal off-the-cuff conversation tonight. We'd like to do that in a more formal way and make sure we're rooted in things that back up those anecdotal statements, but I think you're not going to find a lot of articulation from us probably around why junior high is a better approach to that
And
sense,
maybe because
JP.
there really isn't, right? It's basically, in my head, it's practice for high school. That's about it. Your credits don't matter, so your grades don't actually matter. So those are even practice, right? There's no GPA, it doesn't carry over. And so and to me, that's not enough to say, well, we're practicing for high school to get us ready for high school. When we even say at high school, we're limited in our CTE offerings, and is it relevant necessarily? So I don't know what benefit we're going to get. I think pushback we get is, well, it's the way we've done it. It's what we're used to. Because kids' behavior, when they opened up the 9th grade center at West, and they only had the 9th graders there, their behavior was terrible at the end of the year. Because they never learned. They never learned how to not be 8th graders. Right, and the 6th graders will in turn learn from the 8th graders, and so that will change. I would, if I was a junior high principal, I would be worried because you have to deal with that, and it isn't established. But kids will learn. They'll pick up. They'll see. They'll have it modeled for them. They'll see good behavior. They'll know what that looks like. And I think our 6th graders will developmentally and from a maturity standpoint be better off with 3 years in junior high. I wouldn't be against 4 years. However, I think space-wise, that's where we're going to just removing 2 grades out of elementary. And 1. I don't know how we're going to find room is at our junior highs to put 6 graders there.
So that tees up my next question, and that's something I think we need to answer. Right? Does this entail then building middle schools? Right? More buildings, not just trying to make the ones we have bigger, right, to handle it. And I thought about this years ago, because in my head I was like, well, if we went 5-8 and we basically were able to build 3 additional middle schools, so we had 2 that would feed each school, and we were very intentional about where they were at, it would help in us as we talk about boundaries and feeder systems. It would allow us an opportunity to balance at that secondary, that we did this secondary and elementary in very separate times, and they kind of ended up at different places, and that's where we ended up as we were talking about the secondary transfer policy. We had to grandfather in different things, and it gets kind of messy there. If we did it that way, maybe we can actually design a better system from the start. But then you're talking about a pretty significant expense of building 3 brand new schools, right? So while I see it as a thing that really works, I'm not sure it financially works. So then it's, okay, do you pare it back? But even with just adding 6th graders, I don't know if they'd fit. So I guess that's what I want to know.
Response, because Chase asked it earlier, could we afford to build 3 middle schools? And I would say to you, only if you put the preschools back in the existing buildings, because there was some money allocated to build preschools. So if you just take that money and reallocate it, there is a possibility that we could get there and build 3 new middle schools, but that's just a possibility. But you'd have to give up one to do the other.
Well, I'm very much in favor of putting
I'm talking about
preschools in all of our
regional
schools.
preschool centers.
Can we also expand the current junior high?
Yeah, to answer Maka's question, or maybe to use a word she used as far as efficient, you know, our most, I think, fiscal appropriate approach, right, is to look at that 6th grade to then the middle school, and then we would call our junior highs middle schools, and we could add on to the footprint of those campuses and successfully handle that. We save big money from having to go out and build brand new facilities. We could take on the 6th grade at our current campuses. To Sean's point about the boundaries, if you wanted to address that, you could still have an opportunity to look at that is how you wanted to do it, knowing, you know, what those feeder patterns were going to stay somewhat consistent. I do think if you get into a boundary conversation, that does require, you know, again, community conversation around that without just doing that. But I think there's good teach and learning reasons to do the middle school format, and there's good economic reasons to do that with the 6th grade on the current campuses, instead of investing in, you know, new facilities in all of those parts of town, and then maybe not being able to do some of the things you'd want to do at a high school level with CTE and learning pathways, or be able to do even from a preschool programming standpoint. I mean, we're running preschool models, but to make those dollars work, we also don't want to overcommit ourselves somewhere else and not be able to do an early childhood education opportunity there. So we do have to consider those finances. It's not an endless pot of resources with that. So I think that's a way you could do it responsibly.
So I would want to know, I mean, I think this is what we're going to do. That's what it seems like to me, and I'm all for it. I just kind of, the next step for me would be to understand, I don't need to know the details, but big picture numbers of how it shifts everything, so that it'd just be wonderful to be able to move kids in a way that makes sense to the current catchment areas.
Yeah.
Just to see what it would look like. How many kids does that add to each junior high? And then, does it make room for a preschool? That would be amazing. So it's so hard for me to picture that with all the schools we have, right? And all the numbers, but that would be really great to see. And I'm just worried there's going to be some like, oh my God, there's no way we'll be able to fit those people in there, you know? But maybe that's not going to happen.
Well, on the existing campuses, as the buildings are constructed now, you would have a very difficult time fitting them in there.
Right.
Yeah, and so then but you're right, we have to account for those students there, so then how much do we have to build on? Or
Right,
how much
that's
do we
what I
have to
want.
add on to those?
Yeah. I know we can't fit any more people at Southeast. They'd have to eat on the roof.
Yeah, but there's room to expand,
Or at 8 in the
right?
morning.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
yeah, you could expand it, just
Yeah.
currently you couldn't just make
No.
that move, right? Yeah.
Right.
And I think it is going to make, clearly it's going to make an entire grade's worth of room at all of the elementaries. And frankly, they're physically bigger.
But unless the 5th grade needs more space, you see what I'm saying? All the parts are always moving with our population.
But overall,
So-
if you get rid of larger bodies and you're bringing in smaller bodies, you know, like a 6th grade room, a preschool room can be different than a 6th grade room.
Well, it has to be, right?
And it has to be, including lots.
So we hear you, to start running some of those
Yeah.
preliminary both numbers at
Be great.
both sites, and that's trying to cost figures.
And if it can be clean, and I imagine, because all of our junior highs are similarly sized, right?
North Central's a little bit
Central
smaller
would
than
be
the
the
other two.
smaller one.
Yeah, that would be the one that would need the
But
most.
since they have the same
space.
catchment, it shouldn't change too much, drastically. Yeah.
I think there's
Relative to
always
each other.
questions about that though, so I just think that's what we want to look at, right? There
Yeah.
might be good reasons to change some areas. I don't know.
Right.
I just think it'll be helpful to see it.
Yeah, North Central would be the first place we would have to look at a second facility if we weren't going to do additions to that building, right? I mean, it's the smaller of the three, but it's also the most stretched on size.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the impact of the community relationship with junior high teachers and buildings will be totally changed for the better. Junior high is a blip in our education process right now. I hate to say it, but I've not been to a single Southeast PTO meeting, and I'm my second kid going through there. So, just as an example,
Yep.
and I think that's very common. And I also think it has an impact on the education the kids get out of it, because we're always just like, all right, just get it over, we gotta get out of
Yeah,
high
it's
school.
like, get you to high school.
Yeah.
Let's just get this over, instead of it being a real valuable experience in and of itself. And then if we were able to add in some of that CTE and some
Yeah.
exploration and some real, kind of like using that time to help them figure out then what they want to focus on in high school and being able to deliver that.
Well, and it ties to some of our core conversation too. We remember a math education committee meeting where we talked about elementary math instruction, and so you start to think about what that sixth grade instructional model looks like in comparison to the elementary model. And that one you could probably argue some different trade-offs between the elementary and secondary, but I do think there'd be some benefits if those were, if the sixth grade was moved to the junior high concept and you had content area specialists starting to teach math, language arts, not only expanding and exploring different opportunities, but then you're also being pretty targeted with some of your instructional approaches at that grade level too.
So, I'd like to talk about what I would like to hear as you make your presentations, what I'd like to hear about it. I want a really thorough discussion of the effects upon equity in making this kind of issue. I don't know what they are. I'm sure you will be able to let us know. Staffing. Is that an issue, asking the sixth grade teachers to go to middle school?
Yep.
What the implications of that might be. You mentioned something about this might have an effect upon our CTE offering. Maybe I misunderstood you. But if it
Well,
does,
so we made a couple different references there, Charlie. One was if you're more efficient in the model and the expenditures around the middle school, that potentially saves you dollars to do other things like the CTE programming at the high schools. It also expands your ability to offer different opportunities at the middle school level, which could be a CTE offering.
curriculum, I don't know if that curriculum changes for sixth graders as they go to become a part of the middle school, as opposed to part of the elementary school. That may not be an issue. I'd certainly like to hear about it.
Yep.
And the Education Association's input. This is apparently, I assume it would have some significant effect upon how teachers teach.
Yep.
And those are the areas that I was noted as we were talking.
Thanks.
I think I actually, Sean, listening to you, I think I'm pretty much where you said that you are right now, but I'm not committed to making a decision right now.
Yep.
I looked around at Jane or Lisa. I know you've been pretty quiet. I didn't know if you wanted to add on something. It's not monopoly here, so.
Been saying
feel free.
everything that I've been thinking, so I don't need to add to it. But yeah, I like the middle school model. I think it's really I agree with what Maka said about lengthening it by 50%. I think would be huge in terms of community and parent engagement and improving the culture there. The curriculum. The chances to expand the curriculum for sixth graders in math and social studies. Those are some of the advantages I see there. So I do like the middle school model.
I've been a fan of the middle school model for a while. And what kind of stuck with me is the point about it's a blip for parents, it's a blip for the kids. And I think what we see is some of our higher rates of bullying and harassment taking place at the junior high level. And it's because these kids don't feel connected to a sense of community at their school. But if we add another year that they're all together, there's some people that argue, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've seen this argument made that it reduces the bullying and harassment for the kids because it's a more cohesive experience. And so that, to me, if true, is a huge educational improvement for, that we would get. And we've talked about, I think, the curriculum benefits, but then of course there's the extracurricular benefits too. I still am just so frustrated that, right, to do band in 6th grade, you have to find a ride to the junior high. Whereas if we have those 6th graders there, they could do band right in their school and not have to worry about transportation, and maybe that makes it accessible to more of our students, which I see as an equity issue. And it's of course not just band. Then we bring in all of the extracurriculars that are offered at a junior high, the sports and the orchestra, all of that. I think that makes it much more equitable for our more marginalized students to engage in extracurricular opportunities, which I think are really important to their whole education.
That's a huge one. I didn't think of that. I always think it stinks that we don't have them. Back when I was in schools, small schools, you could do sports at school and music at school. But it's here. It's in junior high. Yeah, that's awesome. It'd be great.
And I also kind of agree with Maka. I don't know how much super deep community input we need. I don't know what we're going to, hear. Aside from a board that sounds like we're in large consensus agreement with a community that just reelected a board and also approved all of the money we asked them to approve. I think there's a lot of trust there. And I'm not saying no community input or no outreach at all, but I don't know if we want to do a huge, survey. I just think, if we didn't quite know what to do, or if we were sort of on the fence, or if we were really going back and forth, I think that could really help flesh out the ideas. But I think, and I'm a pretty recent convert to this. I didn't know that it was going to be worth it. I don't know if there's hard research that really is going to favor one over the other. You can probably find whatever you're looking for. So I don't think grade configuration necessarily has a huge impact on academic performance, but I think it can only improve relationships to be in a building longer. And that's what it's all about. It's just all about your relationship with the kid. They're not going to learn from you if you don't have a relationship. And that just gives you another year, 50% more time to develop that, foster that.
And it just seems that the 6th graders are closer to the 7th graders than they are to the kindergarten.
Way. Yeah. Most of them.
Charlie kind of asked the question. I guess I'd be curious to what information we can find. If we go this route and we look at trying to expand opportunities at the middle school level, in addition to putting more kids there, does that make it more difficult to kind of go back and retrofit those buildings to have more space and different types of spaces if you're adding in like CTE things? So I think that complicates it a bit. I think it would be worth it, but I think that's the information that we'd have to kind of flesh out to really know how far we go with that part, if that makes sense.
And I thought actually all of Charlie's questions were good. Like, I think where I am, and what I'm hearing is, it seems like a really good idea, and I don't know why we shouldn't do it, but that doesn't mean that we should make an uninformed vote. And I thought Charlie really hit on the points that we need to see to make that informed. And I am particularly interested in the union's input, and then also the credentialing issue. Our 6th grade teachers are credentialed to move over to a junior high, or if there'd have to be some re-credentialing and certification required on their part.
Some would be, some wouldn't be. I mean, some might just be able to teach 6th grade. They might have a K6 license, some might have K8, some might have 6-8. I mean, that's going to be a mixed bag. But we, for sure, I appreciate that.
And we've had a lot of experience with, staff transitions to new attendance centers and things that way, that we would work collaborative with Brady on that, because we may have some that want to stay teaching elementary, and we know we have elementary vacancies every year, and their license may allow them to do that, and that may make sense. Some of them may be able to teach secondary offerings, and they may want to make the transition, or we may need to look at opportunities to expand that at our junior high. So I think that's a whole process of logistical parts we'd have to work through with the association, but agreed with you. I think Charlie's questions are excellent there. We took notes on those.
Yeah.
That helps us make an informed decision instead of just a conversational piece.
I think then the other piece, which is sort of germane to the whole thing here as we're trying to put together the pretty little schedule that's up on the calendar. What kind of time frame would we be looking at to get everything ready that, say, the year 20XX is the year that we could make that switch, right? Because I think that's what people are going to want to know, because people now are going to feel like, I've got a third grader now, so I'm thinking about fourth grade and fifth grade, right? I've got a seventh grader now, I'm thinking about seventh and eighth grade. If it's 6 years from now, 10 years, or whatever it lands on to finish that up, I think is going to make whatever community input you get different, right? So I think we really need to figure out.
What you see in that chart now is 5 years worth of work, and it's scheduled so that we can handle the cash, and the workload. Remember that discussion? So if you're asking today what would it be, you get the first 5, we're talking about the second 5.
Okay.
Just to be honest, I mean, you're not, there's no way, there's a way, but you're gonna have to give up a lot of promises
Right.
to slide it, okay? These are the promises and the completions. Now you're talking about the future, so that's kind of how I laid that out.
I'm always a proponent of doing it right before doing it fast. So whatever makes the most sense to get it to a good place, I think we should do that. But just having that number, right, that year, will make everybody
The
feel
benefit
a
of
little better
making
about
that
it.
decision now is, do you put this addition on this building, or because you know you're gonna do this? There's a lot of interaction there, so even though it's 5, 6 years down the road, it affects all these projects.
Oh, yeah, I want to make the decision before 5 years
But
from now.
that's my question about it. You referred to your timeline. Isn't all that going to change if we do
No,
it in the middle?
It probably wouldn't change. I think,
Or a lot.
what Chase was talking about at the beginning would be, what we need to know now is if we were seeing a lot of resistance to this concept, or if we present some additional, because I would think we'd come back with this pretty quickly to you, right? I mean, this is going to be one of the first conversations. What we need to be doing now is looking for land to sufficiently buy additional spaces at the middle level. If we're not doing that, then we can keep moving on this timeline, knowing that in about 5 years, we're potentially switching to this concept, and we'd set that.
Well, let me show you. First 5 years, right? Second 5 years,
Yeah.
pretty empty, right? I mean,
So I would
I just
would
didn't
take that.
understand that we didn't have to do more adjusting, so sorry.
Well, I would say what Dwayne said a little bit differently is, we do have 5 years with the projects. It doesn't mean that if you wanted to move on this concept sooner, we couldn't, because what Dwayne's listed out is that we can handle about $30 million a month, right? Is that what he said? A year, I'm sorry, $30 million a year, a month. I give him a lot of credit. And I give us a lot of money. Yeah, all of a sudden,
There was a couple months during the accelerated plan that about did me.
We're gonna negotiate. I like your task.
so we would just have to reconfigure that and balance it if we wanted to move that a lot sooner. But even if we didn't, there's a couple projects on here. Northwest Kitchen is one, Southeast Kitchen is another, that if we make this decision to move to middle schools and to use our
those are
existing
gonna look
buildings,
different.
we need to update those kitchens
That's what I was wondering.
to accommodate a third more
Yeah.
students, not what they have right now.
So just-
That's how those projects could ebb and flow a little bit. as well.
That was my concern.
yeah.
Except it is 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, what'd I say? 30?
third.
And so just to be ahead of the curve, we asked the architect just yesterday to look at expanding the cafeteria at Northwest as part of the plan. So we're going to get an alternate for doing that. So anyway, we're trying to stay ahead of that curve.
And if anything, one thing we learned when we were going through the first one is there was give and take. If this move makes the changes that you just described, for example, which it will, we'll have to have bigger improvements to the middle schools, the junior highs. Are there any sacrifices that are going to be made in the meantime so that certain schools maybe aren't going to be getting a difference or an improvement or a change in size because they're going to lose their 6th grade population? And I don't need to know that now, and I don't assume you know that now, but that's one of the things that when we were going through that first FMP was really frustrating, to be like, this is great, oh, and surprise, your school's gonna close. Or, just hypothetically. We gotta make sure, I'm just saying, we gotta make sure if there are going to be compromises like that, which there probably will. I know it's all seeming like it's simple, but none of these turn out to be pretty complicated. We need to make sure we're on top of that messaging.
Sure.
And we're clear that we're not closing any schools.
No, I was being silly.
Yeah.
I'm saying there's always a give and a take.
Someone might lose a project.
Right.
Right.
All right.
Maybe I should have said that. I was only, sorry, I was just being silly. It wasn't a very good thing to be
I
silly about.
understand, right.
Yeah. Someone might lose a project or the scope of a
They
project.
might, yeah.
Added to Charlie's list, what I would be interested in is a timing rec. Because here's.
The timing what?
A timing recommendation.
Oh.
Timing
Oh,
rec.
yeah.
If we hear from you, which I suspect we will, about the virtues of middle school, and then we're told like, well, we're gonna wait 5 years because, and there's not a need to wait like, if there's a way to do it sooner, and we think we should because the educational outcomes are gonna benefit the students, I just wanna know what the timing recommendation is gonna be, of when to start working on this. Because I do have to say, it seems like if we're gonna be told how great it is, waiting 5 years seems like a long time. But maybe Dwayne's gonna tell me, well, we gotta add on to the junior highs, and that's gonna take 2 years of construction, and that's fine. But I think we need to understand why we have to
Sure, well, I think we
delay
can
it.
start
If
making
we
some
want-
assumption-based
if we
models
want
to
to.
say, okay, if this makes sense to you and this is what you want to do, then the trade-offs, the timing,
Yeah.
you know, those things can be worked in the recommendation and know, okay, well, here's where the timeline started, this is what it adjusts to now, you know, to look at that. So that all makes sense to us.
Because if this is what we're gonna do, I'm willing to redo the timing of other projects and, like Mary Kate said, kind of move things around a little bit in order to get this done, so we can clear the way so that we can get the other stuff moving after that. I guess prioritize it. We can prioritize this if it's important.
Do we necessarily have to wait to do early childhood until all kids, all sixth graders are moving to a different school? Can we do early childhood in some buildings so quickly?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good segue to some things we've worked on a little bit with early childhood ed, Charlie, and really, so we'd had that, it was a work session a long time ago already, where we kind of had some consensus around expanding early childhood offerings in preschool, and so what the team has worked on is really looking at a few pilot sites to try to expand those offerings next year, and to try to look at how we could run a couple pilots or a pilot to know, can we figure out a model throughout the course of next year to know, is this something then we could replicate in the future moving forward on a larger scale? And that wouldn't only be with just sites at our school, but also with our external partners. We're looking for a funding model there that works with them with, you know, an all day, including RAP, and then an all day, you know, including RAP at our school sites. And so part of that one's a little touchy from that standpoint, that we want to make sure we land on a model that works really well before we go to a larger offering there. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before with the funding
An early
just being
childhood
tricky.
model works well. Is that what?
Or early childhood model that works well and is sustainable for us financially.
From a
Yeah.
physical point of view, the 3 new elementary schools all have early childhood rooms in them. You know, maybe not a lot, but have some. And even some of the renovated schools that we've done, we've included early childhood in them. So there are several schools that already have a space to start with.
Yeah, because for me, the big question on that is staffing. If it's going to be sustainable, that's where my, you know, I'm sure we can build the space, I'm sure we can find the space, but can we staff that in a sustainable way? And I hope so, because I do think that's the, you know, the next thing that we can do is really offer that in all of our, I mean, I just think that's a real community benefit to have, and an educational benefit for students, is to have that in the building, start that connection early. Obviously, most importantly for the kids who are the furthest behind when they start, you know, it's most important for them to be exposed to, you know, school and how we do it and all of the things we'll expose them to in preschool. But I think it's also just a good thing to say, hey, if we get to that sustainable model, that's just another reason to go to the middle school models, because it supports us being able to offer that to all our buildings. And I just think it's another reason to go that route. And I just think it'd be if we can pull it off and if it's sustainable, I just think that would be one of the biggest community benefits we can offer. Because right now it's who can bring their kid to Park Day daycare? I mean, who are the people? I just don't know hardly anybody who's really able to make that work, unless they've already got a ton of privilege, you know, and the freedom and the flexibility to do that.
So I don't know how detailed we're going to get into early childhood today, but I've heard a couple of times during the meeting talking about moving preschool in total into our buildings. And I want, one of the complications with that is that preschool is really the turning point of profitability for private child care providers. So if we as a district corner the market on preschool and take all of that away, what we will be doing is driving our early child care providers out of business, a lot of them, which means there will be no care for the 0 to 3 year olds. So we will be fixing one problem and creating a new problem. And so part of the work that we've been doing very carefully and very thoughtfully is finding a model where we don't do that and having a lot of this work be done in connection with our private providers so that it's collaborative and we make sure that we don't create a child care desert for our youngest kids in the community.
Is that what you meant by external partners?
Yeah, because part of the way, and I think, so we talked about a middle school presentation to you guys. Really what we would need to do is also an early childhood presentation to you once I think we have some confidence in a model, because part of the modeling we're looking at, they have to talk to each other. The external model with the partners has to also wash with what we would do on site with our preschool. So Lisa's been involved asking a lot of good questions about this, has good relationships with the community, with our early childhood partners, and so been bringing a lot of information to the table for us on that. And so at some point we'd want to come back to the full board and say, hey, here's something we think we could pilot next year. This is how it works and avoids that problem that you just articulated there. Because we wouldn't want to take all of that on in the effort to do something good and then create another problem, like she said, for early care in our community either. So that's where the two models have to work together. And we've also tried to look at things about, a sliding scale potentially for families that are low income versus those that could pay more in tuition. It relies on child care assistance, and what you guys will learn when we present some of this stuff to you. Putting that preschool funding model together is very complicated. There's all kinds of different funding sources that come together to make that work. The amount of funding we get, how we collaborate with those external partners around who provides the teacher or if we provide the teacher. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, and something we would need to have additional conversation on once we felt confident in being able to present you guys something that is workable to try.
It's really exciting. I just want us to all keep an open mind as to what preschool may look like, because it may not look like that it's just in our buildings. There's a couple options.
Yeah, I don't want to unintended consequences.
The great thing is, it sounds like there's consensus on both
Yep.
of the issues you've brought to the table.
Rosina's not able to be here tonight. Should we make some provisions for reviewing this discussion when she can?
Well, it sounds like we're going to get presentations on the different things. And,
Yeah.
I think there'll be further discussion after each chunk of that too, right? Before we're really making any decisions moving forward. But.
So the one we probably won't have time to get into tonight that I didn't take from the top, but it in some ways ties to CTE and learning pathways, in some ways it doesn't. But there's been conversations in the district since I've been here, and things that came up through that community engagement process around FMP 2.0 is, how serious are you about wanting us to look at anything from a magnet school to a public charter school to incorporating into one of those into that multi-use educational facilities? From the top, what I would say is, I think we'd have to be pretty passionate about it and super committed to it, because it's going to take time, energy, and resources away from the other work we're doing. And so what I'm trying to say is, it can't just be a nice to do thing. I think we have enough critical work going on in the district that we really have to believe in it and know that it's serving a purpose and it's helping us achieve our goals, rather than it just sounds fun, or that it sounds, and I'm not suggesting that's the way anybody articulate it, but it does fracture away from some of the other mission critical work that I think we have to do in the district. And so those can be really beneficial, but I think you have to ask questions about how many kids it can serve. And I'm probably talking more here about magnet schools and public charter schools. I think the multi-use educational facility that we accounted for in the plan would help us accomplish potentially some of the goals we already have in place around online learning program, alternatives, high school programming, what we could do with those alternate learning pathways or CTE extension activities. So there's more opportunities there to connect to current work. A magnet school or any kind of a public charter that has come up in conversations before kind of turns the attention towards something else. But maybe there's a compelling reason you want us to talk more about that or look seriously at it too.
I would say.
Didn't we talk, didn't the district have a discussion about magnet schools 5 years?
We do it every
Yep.
3 to 5 years.
There was probably Yeah, 7 or 8 years ago. That we
There's
had
a big
task
one.
force.
It's
Yeah.
my first year in the district.
Yeah,
I gave a
just say,
report like
yeah.
6 months in about.
We both got to sit on that committee.
Yeah,
Yep.
it didn't develop into anything.
Okay, I gotta tell you, coming in here, I knew I was gonna talk about middle schools. I'm honestly surprised how agreeable you've all been. Thought there was gonna be a lot more
No offense
animosity.
taken, Johnny.
But I kind of felt like it was going to be like, there's this big thing, or we could do this big thing, or we could do this big thing. A middle school format is a huge paradigm shift for us.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big chunk to take on.
Yeah.
And I think we're all still committed to the early childhood changes as well, which are two big things.
Yep.
Anything else seems like an awful lot to cram in there, to me. Now, if I were going to throw some out, the only thing, we've talked about the schedule, our calendar, and I know a lot of people have kind of thrown around the idea of a magnet that's a year-round school that has a very niche clientele maybe that would use that or would be able to use that. That'd be kind of the one thing that stands out, but trying to figure that out while doing other big changes seems like too much to me.
Well, I was just going to say that I'd like to see if we have consensus on middle schools and early childhood, see what that map looks like, because I bet if we took away map, then we can get some of those years filled in, and then see where we are on the map and the timeline and the budget. And if that takes our attention for the next 8 years of building, and it's most of our save and pebble funds, then I think we kind of know the answer on doing a magnet school. But if there's a gap and there's still an opportunity, I guess what I'm saying is I'm not ready to say, no, I don't want to pay attention to it. But at this point, I don't know if we can. So if the answer is you can't, we don't have time or money to do it, then that's an easy decision for me. Then I say that we don't do it. So I'm kind of crossroad. I'd want some more.
I came from a district that had 3 schools like that. One was fine arts, one was science and math, and the other was year-long school. Okay? They were all very popular programs. What it really ended up being was using buildings that needed to be repurposed, that there was no need to keep that school or that attendance center open, so that it became a magnet school for science and math and brought kids from other parts of the city to that school. Basically open and roll in. And that's how they use that type of magnet school in Des Moines.
Yeah, that's my thought, right? Like, the idea of magnets is drawing people to a certain place for whatever reason. And that's where I'd like to see community input. Like, if we could see that a lot of members of our community would take their kid to a year-round school, and it's significant enough that you could have a school, maybe there's an opportunity there. To do whatever you want, does it help your demographic balancing? But if the desire was there and if people would use it, then I'd want to know that. What I wouldn't want to do is run ahead with something that nobody wants to do, and then it's a waste. But if there was a huge community, and to me, I know STEM has been done, I know fine arts has been done. I personally think language immersion is the way to go, and that's the one thing that I've heard. That and year-round school are the 2 things that are like, because that again gets at so many educational things that there's no other way really to teach it other than, and no matter what, we know language learning happens much better the younger you start. And so if the community desire, and that's where I'd like to see more community input, what would people want to do before we spend a whole lot more time and energy talking about it at all? Would there even be the desire for something? And those are the 2 things I've heard. I haven't heard too many people begging for a fine arts magnet. That doesn't seem to be.
I think you're right. I think the issue though is back to, let me just assume there is a need or a desire for it. I don't think we have time right now.
Right.
So like, I don't really want community input saying we really want a magnet school. If my response to them is, yes, so do I, and a trip to Spain. I don't want to do it when we have so many things on our plate that are so important, and we're lean as it is with funding.
Or if we can't start the magnet school for 5 years, then let's not spend a lot of time talking about what that looks like now. Because to me, there's gonna be so many changes in education in
that's
5
true.
years. So let's table it and come back to it in 4 years and see, and get community input at that point. But that's, if they're gonna tell us we can't do it, then that's, I just don't wanna spend.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I don't spend a lot of time on it. I, you know, to me, you're
But I
right.
love it. I want a magnet. They're so cool.
Yeah, I do too.
But like,
They're
it's
so
so
cool.
It's what Matt said. Like, it's just like, we
Yeah, right.
can't do it because it's
Well,
a fun, cool
It's
thing.
time, energy, and the other thing I always think about with the guys, it's really cool for the kids to get to experience it, right? But it's not cool for the, other 13,500 kids that don't go to that school, right? And so I always think about where we're spending our time and energy on things that need to be scalable, right? And so even the year-round conversation, I think we'd love to have a conversation with you about our calendar some more and digging into that and what the district calendar looks like, and are there better things we could do that way in a long-term fashion. That's exciting. That impacts everybody, right? Not just the students that attend that school. So it can be a really great experience for the kids that get to attend that school, but it doesn't do anything for the other students that aren't on that attendance center, right? And so when we think about where time, energy, resources go, that's where I always think about, okay, our people really need to be working on things for everybody, what's good for all kids, and how do we keep our focus there?
Well, and I'll tell you, that's why I think foreign language immersion and year-round, because to me, that's a pilot for what we could do everywhere. Like, why aren't we just an immersion district? Why aren't we
Yeah,
just a
then you
year-round
could take them
district?
to, yeah.
Yeah, because I do think that year-round, I mean, what I've seen is districts that go year-round, oftentimes surrounding districts start to follow that model because it's really popular, it works it fits in our economy, it's.
And from a facility standpoint, we talk about magnet schools and programming, immersion is on the cheaper end because it doesn't require specialized equipment like STEAM or fine arts or a sports academy, right? Because it's the same classroom, it's the staffing piece. That's the challenge.
And year-round's the same
with,
thing, there's no
with the
extra
immersion. Right.
different facilities.
So it's almost a
just-
plug and play, right? We have new schools on, so it's from that, we don't want to mislead you and say, well, we don't have the space. I mean, we have to build new elementary schools, but it's to that point of where are we spending our time, energy, can we replicate it? But I think it's a good conversation because remember when we started FFP 2.0, it was, what are those concepts that we think are going to drive education? And those are things that we could incorporate into buildings. And we want to make it fun and exciting because that's where we need to take it. So I don't think it's a fool's errand to have some of those conversations because you don't know what some of those concepts might come out of it to potentially translate into some of our regular ed buildings.
And it
Not
fits
regular ed, but non-magnet.
different models and really support our portrait of graduate. I mean, if we think about global citizenship, all of that. And year-round, I think, is just, again, I do get tired of the fact that we've had this educational model based on an agricultural economy,
That we don't have anymore?
right? And we're just, oh, well, that's the way we've done it.
Well, and Brady and I have talked a little bit, and I think that'd be one thing we'd want to try to engage the staff on a larger scale about too, because knowing what's up in front of us with probably upcoming staff shortages, if you picked up in, your social media today, you saw the conversation that's happening, in Des Moines and just what people are going to start to think about education here. What is a good, what do we do to try to appeal to our educators, right? About being here, staying here, what do we offer differently? How do we account for social emotional health of our employees? How could that speak to them in a different way about what that calendar looks like rather than, you go hard through 180 days and then you have this massive gap. Some people like that because that's what they're accustomed to, but is that always even what's best for folks, right? Or is there a better model we could figure out that would create some work-life balance for people? Did we learn anything through COVID with that could be telling for the social emotional benefit of our staff and our kids? So that's an ongoing conversation I think would be a good one too, that maybe isn't as directly tied to how we design facilities, but is designed to, address and make sure we retain and recruit high-quality people here in the district long-term too.
So I know Lisa wanted to say something because I want to wrap us up
Yeah.
in enough time to get ready for our board meeting.
I was just gonna say that I would echo JP's interest in exploring a different calendar as applied across the entire, like a full year calendar as applied across the district as a whole, instead of just back to school. But I'm very interested in that. And I'm interested if there are any districts who do it different based on elementary and secondary. If we can run an elementary full year.
Oh,
and then when you-
district-wide?
Yeah, district-wide elementary. And then when you transition to secondary, you go onto our agricultural calendar, or whatever we're gonna call
I think
that.
anything we can do to make it more flexible for our employees is good. I think that's what a lot of people are looking for now is more flexibility. And yeah, we get huge summers off, but the least flexible job is like a school teacher.
Yeah.
Like you gotta be there at this time until this time, and then every hour you can switch.
Then a bell tells you to.
And a bell.
Switch.
Yeah.
Delete the second. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
And I like the dual language program. I don't know if anybody's ever visited the dual language program at West Liberty.
It's pretty
It's
awesome.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Talk to some of their board
Yeah, I
directors at
think
ISB.
That would be amazing to have in this district. I know that's now we're
Again, good conversations, because I think those are the big picture.
So to try and put a bow on this so we can get ready for our actual board meeting, presentations on middle school and early childhood, are we doing that in work session style, board meetings? How quickly can we get these done?
I
Because
guess
think
I'd
we
like
want to
to-
move quick.
I think, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think part of what we're thinking would be an effective model is these repeated 5 o'clock work sessions before board meeting, do the presentation, get the information. Otherwise, if we save until after the meetings, we've all known what happens to work sessions, right? So if we could do that and stay on the only thing I wasn't clear on when we left the last board meeting is how often were we going to try to do a 5 o'clock work session before the meeting? Was it once a month in place of that operations? Stay on that schedule? The only concern there is, are we moving fast enough? And do we need to do something more frequently for a while?
Well, the only other option besides that is to add on the first Tuesday, because the third one's taken up by Ed Committee, and the fourth one has P&G before all the meetings.
Oh yeah, we have P&G on the
So
fourth one.
we either add on the first Tuesday of the month, or we do a monthly here and keep on the ops one. And maybe we
What if we
go
commit to
heavy
the
early and then,
next month, have the presentation at 5 in place of ops, and then we'll have a calendar for you that would maybe address
That sounds like.
what we do to move forward.
Because
And
I
that,
mean,
yep,
we got to consensus super fast.
yeah.
I do want to make this a top priority, though, so like, what it
Yeah.
takes is what we need to do.
yeah. All right, but I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And you got 2 minutes.